Hello guys and gals, and welcome. So today we're going to do a little bit of talking about Diablo 4, and instead of criticism, we're going to do something else today, and we're going to talk about how I would fix Diablo 4 if I was a developer. So the first thing we're going to be talking about is fixing the horrible stash. The stash in Diablo 4 is very disappointing. And it's disappointing for a lot of reasons, and not just for lack of space. It's also disappointing because you can't tell what the hell is in there. There's a lot of problems with the stash, and let's talk about the stash together. So, first off, what is the main issue with the stash? Well, the main issue with the stash is that when you open it up and you look at it, you cannot immediately tell what you're looking at. Some items stand out over others, like for instance boots. You know that they're boots, but you don't necessarily know what boots they are. Even the unique items, you can't tell exactly what they are because there are flaws within the way the system actually works. One of the biggest of those flaws is the fact that, well, the iconography of the items changes depending on what character is looking at them. So if I'm on my druid, for instance, or my barbarian, and I'm looking at my unique items, then my unique items look like this. Right? But if I hop off of my barbarian and I hop onto my druid, for instance, and then I take a look at the same stash, what you'll notice is that pretty much all the unique items have changed. Some of them have stayed the same, a couple have stayed the same, but for the most part, all of them change to different iconography. Before on my barbarian, the Frostburns had these little spikes on the back, right? Now they got a gem. Fists of Fate have feathers now. They didn't have feathers on my barbarian. And all the various items in the game that are not specific to specific characters have iconography that changes. So when you go in here and you look at your items on the druid, everything has one iconography. And then when you go in and look at your items on your barbarian, it has another iconography. And then your sorceress has another. And your necromancer has another. And your friggin', your rogue has another. There's no limit, really, to, like, how many different icons you can potentially see, depending on what character is looking at the stuff. Some of the items stand out. A lot of them don't. On top of this, we also have other issues, like, for instance, well, the actual sockets of the item. So when you have specific items that have a certain number of sockets and are a certain shape, you can't see what the item is anymore. It's very difficult to see what the item is when you have more than a certain number of sockets. My barbarian is a very clear example of this, because when you pull up my barbarian and you look at my barbarian's equipment, you are immediately hit with a bunch of sockets, and you can't even tell what equipment he's wearing. If I were not to hover over my barbarian's equipment, could you tell me what I have in the right-hand slot here? Could you tell me what I have in the left-hand slot here? Could you tell me, I mean, seriously, could you tell me what this is without me holding my mouse over it? The sockets covering up the iconography makes for an even more complicated mess that causes the items to be even less identifiable than they otherwise normally would be. And this has to do with the fact that, number one, the iconography is not very unique. Number two, it's not very large. Number three, it's covered up. Number four, it changes between classes. And all of this results in iconography that is very difficult to learn for the user. It's like trying to read a book where the letters on the page keep swirling around and changing position. Maybe eventually you'd be able to decipher it, but it would take you some time and a lot of learning, going over all the classes and trying to figure out the iconography of all the classes. And even then, because the sockets are covering up some of the items, you're still left with a whole nother issue where you might not even be able to even see what item you're looking at. And of course, like I said, it depends on the item. Some items, when they have sockets, it doesn't cover it up, like the amulets here. You know it's an amulet, but which amulet is it? You still got to hover your mouse over every single amulet, right? And as an example, let's do something fun, shall we? So let me take an actual image from Diablo 2. This is an icon from Diablo 2. Most of you will recognize this icon. This is a very unique piece of equipment. It currently has, I think, what is it? Four. I think there's 4 pieces of this gear in the entire game. Tyraels, which is blue. Templars, which is green. Soaks of the Victor, which is this one. And then I believe Millibregas also has an interesting color. But look what would happen if I take this and shrink it down to about the same size as a Diablo 4 icon. Right? It's very tiny, and it's kind of hard to even see what it is, but you can still recognize it, right? Now put some sockets over that, and make it so that you can barely even identify it, and now you have something that's just going to blend into the background. This is the kind of silliness that Diablo 4 has going on for it. Now they talked about adding a search bar, right? A hogwash. I mean, sure, if you're going to add it, if you already got it in the system, go ahead and put it in. I'm not going to complain that you're adding it, but it's a symptom. You're addressing a symptom to an otherwise systemic problem. That'd be like if I told you my car just caught on fire, and you gave me like a cup of water, and you're like, here, just pour the cup of water on there, you'll be fine. And I pour the cup of water on there, and my car it just like bursts into flames even hotter than it was before somehow. I don't know, like the water turned into vapor and separated into oxygen and hydrogen, and it just fed the flames. The search bar is not a solution to the problem. The search bar is a solution to a symptom of the problem. The problem is systemic. It is that they have the inventory system set up so poorly that you cannot, at a glance, tell what you're looking at. And as an example of this, let me pull up Diablo 2. So I'm going to pull up Diablo 2, and we're going to take a look at Diablo 2. I already have it open. Look at that. Magic. And we go to our stash, and when I open up my stash and you look inside my stash, you can tell what everything is in here immediately just by looking at it. You know that that's an armor. You know that that's an armor. You know that that's a circlet. You know that that's a sword. You know that that's a helmet. And not only do I know that this is a helmet, but I know that this is a specific helmet. It is a Roth's coil because of the color of it. It is very specific. It is very clear what this item is. The shield, I know for a fact this is a paladin shield. I don't need to guess this. When I go through the inventory and I look at specific items, look at this. I know for a fact that that armor right there, that black and gold monstrosity, is only one of 2 plates in the entire game. It is either a Griswold's armor or it is a Corpse-Morn armor. And guess what? It's Griswold's heart. That belt right there that has a very specific black tone to it, I know for a fact that it is Iratha's coil. I don't need to hold my mouse over it to figure this out. And because of the unique iconography of the items in Diablo 2, because they are big enough so that you can see them, you can very clearly tell what is in your inventory without having to hold your mouse over the items. Down here at the bottom, I have a Greyform quilted armor. You know why I know it's Greyform quilted armor? Because it looks like a regular quilted armor, except it's tinted a very dark color, a dark gray color. This is Spirit Shroud. I know for a fact this is Spirit Shroud because Spirit Shroud has a slightly different color than the regular quilted armor, and it is very easy to tell. I don't know if I can actually purchase a quilted armor here, but if I could, I would show you the difference between the regular quilted armor and that. It is something that throughout the game you start to get used to the iconography. Saigon's is always white. It's always a bright, brilliant, shiny steel that's almost white-like in color. Saigon's belt, Saigon boots, Saigon armor, helmet. You can literally tell what the items are at a glance. You don't have to hold your mouse over every single item. Now, when you do have to hold your mouse over every single item, or some items, like for instance rings are the ones that don't really have the most advanced unique iconography. And in these specific cases, like a lot of the times with rings, jewels, you are going to have to hold your mouse over the items to find out what they are. But that's very rare in the Diablo 2 world because the majority of the items in the game are so uniquely designed that things like goblin toes stick out like a sore thumb. This pair of gloves right here, which is laying of hands, the bluest of blue gloves, it stands out like a sore thumb. Everybody knows what the hell this one is. You don't need to be a genius to figure this stuff out. It comes naturally. And because none of the iconography changes, And because the sockets are not covering up the item so that you can actually see the item without having to have it be like completely obfuscated by the gems and things that are inside of the item, it makes it so that you can at a glance identify exactly what is in your stash. So in Diablo 4, what I would do is number one, I would increase the size of these icons so that you can actually see the iconography. Number two, I would remove the sockets from the portrait unless you are holding your mouse over it, which would make the iconography more easy to see. Just increasing the size of the items, and I'm not talking about making it so they take up more space. You can increase the size of the items without making them take up more space. You could just simply reduce the number of spots on a tab, double the number of tabs, and increase the size of all the items to compensate. There's also a whole bunch of empty space down here that you could utilize. So you could expand this whole thing down, double the size of the icons, remove the sockets so that you can actually see what the hell's going on, and make it so that at a glance you'd be able to tell what's going on inside the window. And staticize, making the icons static across all classes is also something that's important. Having the icons change for every single class is a really bad idea. I don't know who thought that was a good idea, but it is a terrible idea, and it is something that never should have made its way into Diablo. Another thing that I would talk about is having unique iconography for unique items separate from the legendary iconography. I don't know exactly why they decided to do this, but they have items within the game that are a specific iconography for a unique item, and then they copy that iconography for non-unique items. And I don't think this is a good idea. Legendary items specifically should not have the same icon as the unique items. And a very easy example of this is a Vasily's Prayer icon, and this is a Vasily's Prayer icon. They're the same exact portrait, basically, the little icon for the item. The legendary items should not have the same icon as the unique items. The unique items should be just that. Unique. They should be a unique icon that is not used by any other item within the game. This is not so hard to understand. This way, when you see somebody who is wearing a Tempest Roar, you know for a fact that it is a Tempest Roar, not a random legendary helmet, which does actually happen. There are actually a whole bunch of items within the game that share the exact same iconography with other items that are not those items. In Diablo 2, some items do share iconography. Like, for instance, the Corpseborn Breastplate and the Griswold Heart share iconography, but they are both relatively unique items. One of them is a set item that only exists within the Griswold set, and it's green. Very obvious because it's green. The other one is a unique item, which is the gold color, right? So the gold color makes it into a completely different item, and you can very easily tell the difference. Even if you had a Griswold Heart and a Corpseborn sitting right next to each other, one little pass over top of it without even reading the item would immediately reveal one as a set item, and you would know that it's a Griswold Heart without even having to read the name. So less reused iconography, most definitely. Same thing for the actual character panel here. I don't know why I need to see a picture of my character, especially when I got like some really good pictures of my character in other places. I can zoom in on my character. I can look at my character here. I can also look at my character on the character selection window. And on top of that, now they added it so that your character is also in the social tab, so you can look at your character from the social tab. You can also see your character on the load screens now when you're loading back and forth in between zones. So in my opinion, you really don't need this, and they should increase the size of the iconography of all of these items to compensate and take up this space. This, for in Diablo 2, has large icons, right? So you know this is a shield, you know this is a helmet, you know this is armor, you know this is your freaking you know, your weapon, you know this is armor, you know these are your gloves, etc., etc., etc. It is very obvious what it is you're wearing, what kind of quality the item is. You can tell basically what you have on at a glance without having to hold your mouse over all the items. In Diablo 4, if it wasn't for the fact that I kind of memorized where the slots are, I wouldn't know what is what. Half the time when you're looking at your weapons, or your armor, the sockets are literally covering up most of the icon, with the exception of the gloves and the boots, of course, because the gloves and the boots don't have sockets, right? But when it comes to weapons and your totems and all the other things, it's a little bit more difficult. The biggest icons seem to be like the rings and the amulets, which is kind of funny because they're the smallest items, and because they only have one socket instead of two, you can actually still usually see what ring or amulet you have on. Moving on to the next one, and this is a very important one, which is also related to the stash, but not necessarily the same as what I was just talking about. So when you go to the stash and you look what is in your stash, the majority of the time, the bulk of what is in your stash is unique items, right? That you're holding on to for, you know, builds or specific characters. Rares that you might be planning to use on other characters, but honestly, the majority of those items is legendary affixes that you're holding on to because they're perfect. Like, for instance, I have a 5 symbiotic aspect here, or I have a 40% Craven aspect. I've got a perfect 25% dire wolf sloop, etc., etc., etc. These are affixes that I'm holding on to for specific builds, just in case I want to build those characters. It would be nice to have access to the specific perfect affixes to imbue upon the rare items, right? Well, since the majority of my inventory space is being hogged up by items that I have no intention of ever using, but instead extracting, but I can't extract all the items because I'm constantly full on aspect storage space because they gave us the tiniest little aspect storage space for some reason. Give us a actual place to put our legendary affixes. So if we want to extract our legendary items, give us an actual panel like the Codex of Power, similar to the Codex of Power, but not the Codex of Power, where we can store our legendary affixes once they are extracted, which would be accessible to all characters, and essentially make it so that we can build up a storehouse, essentially, of legendary affixes in this sort of like place. And this also needs a search bar. This one actually does need a search bar because none of the iconography for any of this stuff is unique. These are just like offensive, defensive, resource, utility, mobility. They're not actually icons for the actual affixes. They're just icons for the type of affix they are, right? So you actually do have to hold your mouse over every single one of these pretty much until you start to memorize what position they're in. So a search bar would be absolutely amazing for this, and also if they add an aspect storage, a search bar for the aspect storage would be great. With the things that I've gone over so far, that would completely fix the stash. The stash would no longer be full of legendary items that are completely useless. You would be able to tell what's in the stash at a glance, and on top of that, it would be much less stressful going into my stash. I'm going to be honest with you. At a certain point, I remember my stash was so full and I just kind of threw everything away. I remember one time when I was younger and my mom got upset because there was like a million dishes in the sink and she didn't want to do them. And she was having a bad day that day, and I remember she just took the dishes and she started smashing them. And, and I can kind of get that feeling. Because the stash was so stressful and it was so full all the time, and there was so many things in there that I wanted to keep but I didn't want to throw away because I wanted to save them for other characters, and it would just pile up so fast and so quick. And eventually I just got to the point where I was just like, just F it. I'm just gonna sell everything. I'm just gonna get everything. I'm tired of it. I'm tired of dealing with it. And I'd rather have space than have items that I can use on my other characters when I go make them. And that pretty much does it for the stash itself. Let's talk about another aspect of the game that we need to fix. Iconic drop sounds. The drop sounds in Diablo 4 are really lackluster or boring. I'll be perfectly honest. They're pretty bad. You don't know what drops on the ground just by the sound, and it's really quite sad because in a similar game, Diablo 2, you can literally tell what drops on the ground just by the sound of what it is. Let me actually go and show you guys. So let me go ahead and pull up Diablo 2, and we're going to take a look at some of the sounds here. So I have to turn up the sound specifically for this reason. So we're going to turn this up to maximum. I'm going to blow your eardrums out. And if I drop an item on the ground, like for instance an armor, the sound effect of the armor is amazing. Sound effect of gloves, boots, belt, armor, helmet, shield, amulet, ring. The sound effects of the items when they drop in Diablo 2 are so unique that to this very day, when someone hears a rune drop, they know that it's a rune. And they go searching. They're like, I heard a rune drop. What is it? What is it? The gems. The skull. Everything has a unique sound.
I am overburdened.
Everything has a unique, not just a unique sound, but a uniqueness to it. The sound effects are so very amazing in this game that literally most players can tell what falls on the ground just simply by the sound that the item makes when it falls. They don't have to see that it's a ring. They know that it's a ring. They don't have to see that it's a gem. They know that it's a gem. They don't have to see that it's an armor. They know that it's an armor. In Diablo 4, there is no such thing. In Diablo 4, when you drop a ring, it makes the legendary item sound. When you drop gloves, it makes the legendary item sound. When you drop boots, it makes a legendary item sound. When you drop a unique item, it makes the unique unique item sound. But none of these items have a unique sound effect of their own. The ring doesn't sound like a ring. The ring just sounds like a legendary item. The gloves don't sound like gloves. They just sound like a legendary item. This is one of the really weird things, in my opinion, of all the items in the game. There's so many items within the game. The gems. The gems have this little tink noise. Where's the beautiful gem sound effects? About the only one that even has kind of a unique sound effect is the skull. But it sounds more like a piece of bamboo than it does a skull. And I know the skull sound effect in Diablo 2 is very unique, but it's very unique, and it's very identifiable. My point in this is that the game would do well to have unique drop sound effects for specific items so that you can get excited when you hear an armor drop or excited when you hear a weapon drop, etc., etc., etc. And it's so amazing to have those unique sound effects that literally if you ask any Diablo 2 player to identify items by the sound that they make, I guarantee you most veteran Diablo 2 players could tell you exactly what falls, the item type, just simply by the sound of the item falling. Moving on to another topic, which is more related to lessons of the past, and this is EXP in Diablo. So many other games have already addressed this successfully, by the way, and it's basically the EXP sharing when it comes to games like Diablo 2 and Diablo 3 and Diablo 4. When you're at the beginning of a dungeon, and the rest of your group is doing whatever the hell they want at the other end of the dungeon, and you're still getting EXP while you're standing by the door. This was fixed ages ago with Diablo 2. They had fixed this millions of years ago. I think it was patch like 1.09 or something like that, or I don't even remember exactly which one it was, but it was a long time ago. They restricted EXP to be about 3 screens from the individual. So if I kill a monster, and you are more than 3 screens away from me, then you do not get EXP. And if you kill a monster and you're more than 3 screens away from me, then you do not get EXP. It is the simplest change in the world. Very, very easy to do. Extremely easy to do. All you got to do is just set a maximum range for the amount of EXP that you get, and it would prevent people from standing at the door, and they would have to be engaged and actually follow you around. And quite honestly, dodging bullets on your little low-level character is half the fun of Diablo 2's power leveling. You gotta stay close enough so that you get EXP, but you gotta be quick on your feet so you don't die. Another interesting thing that I would definitely fix is unique items. So unique items really do need to be fixed, and I think one of the biggest issues with unique items is the lack of personal agency involved in the unique items. Many, 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 many of the unique items are very, very restricted to specific use case scenarios. In other words, if I'm on my druid and I find a Vasily's Prayer, well, the Vasily's Prayer is very specifically designed around earth skills or now werebear skills, so it is very specific to that purpose. You are obviously going to be a werebear, and you are going to be using earth skills, and that's it. If you are utilizing the Great Staff of the Crone, you are using the Claw skill, and you are using the Storm skill. So you are using those skills, and if you're not using those skills, then you're not using the Great Staff of the Crone, which makes them very specific to very specific things, which makes them feel very planned and very designed. People tend not to like planned and designed items in that way. There is a lot to be said for the more generic, open-ended items, like, for instance, Fists of Fate, Penitent Greaves, Frostburns, that don't have a specific purpose, that don't utilize a specific skill, but can be useful across a wide variety of classes and characters, because you feel like you might actually be designing something that wasn't intended. And I think deep down, that's what we all want, is we all want to feel like we are doing something new and original, right? Even if we're not. But the problem with these unique items that have specific purposes is that we know that we're not doing something new and original because these items were designed for this specific purpose, right? So all we are doing is using the item for the specific purpose that they were created. Whereas with the items like Frostburns and Penitent Greaves and Fists of Fate, well, they don't have a very specific purpose, right? They are more generically designed. And so one thing I would do is, number one, I would add in a hell of a lot more unique items. There is way too few unique items in this game comparatively to other Diablo games. The number of unique items in Diablo 4 is a pittance by comparison. Number two, I would also add a lot more generic unique items as opposed to class-specific unique items. I feel like in general, generic unique items are far more successful than the more specific unique items are. In fact, honestly, the Druid is probably one of the classes that has the most successful unique items, and that comes down to the fact that some of the things that were targeted at a specific kind of a build ended up being more generic than I think they had planned, and so they ended up being more fun to use, right? Like Vasily's Prayer and Tempest's Roar and Great Staff of the Crone. There's like hundreds of different builds now that involve those items, and it makes them more useful. Another thing about unique items that I would fix is it is no fun to find a unique weapon that is a piece of garbage. And I mean this in the most literal sense. When you find a unique item and it does not have the item power level that you would like. Like, for instance, if you find a weapon that has an extremely low power level, like I'm trying to find one in my inventory right now, of say like if I were to find a Great Staff of the Crone and it was a 611 item power, it's very disappointing and it's very discouraging to find unique items that are basically worthless, completely worthless. And you know without a shadow of a doubt that you could never utilize that item at end game because it doesn't even have anywhere near the fraction of a power that it needs to have. And this doesn't have to do with the stats on the item. Like, for instance, so a lot of the items like helmets and armor and gloves and pants and stuff like that have specific stats. No, this comes down to the actual fact that all of your damage is based off of your weapon and, of course, your totem if you're using a totem. And so if your weapon has ridiculously low power, then all of your skills have ridiculously low power as a result. And so I don't think unique weapons specifically should have variable power levels, that you find it at a really crappy state and it stays at a crappy state forever. It needs to be addressed in a couple different ways. I'm not exactly sure how I would specifically address it. I think there's two main methods that you might use. Number one is making them have static power levels. Number two is having them have scaling power levels that go up with you as you level. So that way, if you do find a Great Staff of the Crone, for instance, at a lower level, then the item power level will scale up to a certain point, and continue to grow with you as you level up your character, which could be a more interesting way to go about it and make it so that you find less completely useless weapons in the unique category. And I came across this myself because things like the Flesh Render, the Great Staff of the Crone, the Crimson sword on the Barbarian, and so forth and so on, if you find them in relatively low item power levels, they're basically just garbage. You just take them right to the NPC and you just sell them because you know for a fact that you're never going to utilize or build your character around like a 611 item power weapon, right? I think that's pretty much it for the unique items. The unique items themselves could be more interesting. I will definitely say that. But I definitely think that the more generic unique items are more interesting than the more specific unique items. So having more generic unique items, I think, would fix that as well. And let's move on to the next topic. Diablo 4 is not Dance Dance Revolution. And you might be asking, what the hell am I talking about? Well, I'm going to give you the clearest example. Every single dungeon, every single place you go, there is some kind of ground-based explosion, ground-based puddle, death explosions, all sorts of crazy things going on a regular basis where you can never, and I mean never, stand still. The running joke is that if you blink too hard, or you take a sip of your drink, you're likely to die because during that brief period of time when you blink, you have stood still too long. Blinking was too long of a standing still. You needed to keep moving. I don't know why you stood still. That's just silly because the number of ground-based explosions and everything going on a regular basis makes for the complete inability to ever look away, to ever become distracted for even a fraction of a second, because even just a fraction of a second of distraction in this game is enough to step on your partner's toe and kill yourself. And thus, that's why I say Diablo 4 is not Dance Dance Revolution. And because of this, we really need to tone down all of the ground-based explosions and death effects to a extreme degree. We do not need a game that requires more attention than a needy girlfriend, okay? I mean, the kind of needy girlfriend that literally, like, you pull up your phone to check and see what time it is, and your girlfriend goes,
"Oh, if you don't want to be here, you can just go. I mean, if you don't want to be here with me, you can just go."
"Babe, I was just checking the time."
No, that's fine. You obviously don't want to be here. Why else would you be checking the time? Because obviously you don't want to be here with me.
And this isn't even a joke. I'm not even joking, guys. This is just one of those crazy things that that unfortunately just kind of in Diablo 4 is really the truth. if you look away, if you blink for even a fraction of a second, a lot of the times it can lead to your death. I had to laugh when one of the hardcore players died because he was checking his map. Another one of the hardcore characters died, what was it? Because he was, he didn't have his buff up at the right second. And of course, you know, in hardcore, death is permanent. So once you're dead, you're dead. You're dead, you're dead. That's it. If we're dead, we're dead. And this is just one of the many things that I would change. Let's move on to the next topic. And that is a better minimap and a better overlay map. One of the issues that I've had with this game is that the minimap sucks. It just sucks. It's not a very good minimap at all. And on top of that, the lack of an overlay map requires you to constantly check the actual map. So instead of relying on this minimap up here, which we can't because it's too zoomed out, it doesn't really show enough information, it's not really all that useful, you constantly have to pull up the big map, which covers up the entire screen, which goes back to the hardcore character who died while checking his map, because you're constantly in this map. It is gotten to the point where in this game, you literally can't rely on this. So you go here, but then when you're out in the wild and you're, you know, getting attacked by monsters, well, you can't really check this map because it seems like every single monster is programmed to beat the crap out of you when you check the map. And then lack of an overlay map means that you're basically just lost most of the time, which I will have to admit a lot of the times in this game. I am just simply lost because I fear opening the map, because if I open the map, I'll probably die, which has happened hundreds of times in my, like, thousands of freaking hours playing this game. And the minimap is so completely useless that most of the time I just kind of ignore its existence because unless the monster or whatever is directly near me, it's not going to be useful, in my opinion. Next on the list, I would add campaign bosses. I don't know why the campaign bosses aren't in the game. I don't know why they're not part of the game. It boggles my mind just to even think about it. But we're not here to talk about what's not in the game. We're here to talk about what I would do to fix the game. And one of the things I would do to fix the game is add the campaign bosses into the actual game. And Duriel. Just as two good examples. I would turn them into butcher-like creatures that would attack you in dungeons or something. Or make some other way that I could fight them by going to a specific area, perhaps, or doing a specific quest that I could repeat. There are other ways that you could add campaign bosses into the actual game and have fun with it. And as of right now, basically none of the campaign bosses are currently in the game to fight, with the exception of Lilith. And Uber Lilith is not exactly for the faint of heart. But moral of the story is that there is a huge part of the game that is just not being used. It's not being exploited. These campaign bosses are things that we like to do. In Diablo 2 and Diablo 3, you could always go back and refight the campaign bosses. And you can't in Diablo 4, and it's really, really strange. And I still don't know why, but it's definitely something that I would change. Next on the list is item level and character level, abbreviated as I level or C level. For some reason or another, in Diablo 4, they made this really stupid decision to tie the item level of an item to the character's level instead of the actual power of the item. And it makes for some really dumb stuff. I got to admit that it's probably some of the dumbest stuff I've seen in the game. Things that happen because they have the item level tied to the character level instead of the item level tied to the item level is really weird. Like, for instance, you end up with 800 item power items that are level 60. Or you end up with freaking like 600 item power items that are level 80. Now, recently they did a small change where they took the item level and they capped it, right? So instead of it now being like if I was a level 100 character that found an item, it wouldn't be capped at level 100 anymore. Now it's capped at 80. It's a Band-Aid fix at best. There is absolutely no reason why item level should be tied to sea level. It is just ridiculously restrictive for no reason. It prevents the sharing of items with other players for seemingly no reason other than to encourage single playerness so that you don't have the ability to share items with each other. Like if I'm on a level 95 character and I find an item now, it's going to be capped at level 80. And if I want to give it to my friend who's level 70, then he's going to have to wait 10 levels to put it on, despite the fact that it's probably well below the power level that he needs for his specific character. And this is a problem across the game because all of the items have the item level tied to the character's level, which is really stupid, and also prevents you being able to share items in between your own characters. So if I'm on my barbarian and I find a really good item for, say, one of my other barbarians, and I want to share that item with my other barbarian who is, say, level 60, and I find an item on my level 100 barbarian, it is going to be capped at 80, and I'm not going to be able to give it to my other barbarian until he hits level 82, which is not good design. If the item power of the item was more associated with the level of the item, it would be a better system in general, because when you have an item, for instance, that is a 799 power level, then you could associate that 799 power level directly with a level and make it so that that is always at that specific level, so that you don't have, for instance, an 800 item power item at level 60, and you don't have a 600 item power level that's level 80. And this is the kind of stupid stuff that goes on because sea level and eye level should never have been associated with each other in the first place. And let's move on to the next topic, which is come on. Sometimes my my mouse doesn't want to switch over. Embarrassing. Super uniques are too rare. This is something that when I originally started the game, we had no clue exactly how rare the super uniques were. And when I say super uniques, I mean things like the Harlequin Crest Shaco, the Grandfather Sword, the Melted Heart of Seleg, the Ring of the Starless Sky, etc. And Ariel's Visage. Those are super unique items in the game that have an extremely rare drop rate, right? I want to bring you to Diablo 2 for a second, because I feel like Diablo 2 is important here in terms of rare items. There are items in Diablo 2 that are exceedingly rare. My character is using one of them right now. This is the Mangsong's Lesson. Mangsong's Lesson is an item that is so exceedingly rare that you will probably never find one. And if you do, you're super freaking lucky. It's a holy grail item. It's one of those items that just almost never drops. And when it finally does drop, you literally didn't even know it existed when it falls. But it still falls often enough that you will see it from time to time. More often than you do the super unique items. And the reason why I'm bringing up Mangsong's Lesson, and the reason why I'm bringing up things like Arcane's Valor, and items that are rare within the Diablo 2 world, is because despite the fact that Mangsong's Lesson is one of the most rare items in the game, and there are even more rare items than Mangsong's Lesson, although it really just depends, because, you know, the Lady Luck can be on your side. You might find a Mangsong's Lesson, but never find a Tyrael's Might. Or you might find two Tyrael's Mights, but never find a Mangsong's Lesson. Just depends on how your luck rolls. But the super unique items in Diablo 4 are many, many times more rare than Mangsong's Lesson. And Mangsong's Lesson is already regarded as one of the rarest items in Diablo 2, to the point where most people will never see it fall. There was a funny little thing about somebody finding a Mang Song's lesson, and he said he got excited and he woke up his wife to tell her about it, and she was less than impressed. And I remember, I think Mr. Llama chimed in and was like, "No, you totally wake up your wife for that. That's like a one in a million thing to find yourself a Mang Song's lesson. Totally something worth being proud of, right?" And as rare as Mang Song's lesson is, the super unique items in Diablo 2 or Diablo 4 are even more rare. And for this reason, number one, I would make it so that the super unique items can actually drop. I have a sneaking suspicion, and this is just my my gut feeling, my hunch. I don't think the super unique items can actually fall. I don't think they're actually random drops. I think Blizzard controls when they fall. But that's neither here nor there. The super unique items being more rare than winning the lottery at the current moment. I looked it up, by the way. If you look up how many people won the lottery last year, like for instance, let's do this real quick. So if you just type into Google, how many people won the lottery last year? According to the internet, let's see here. We want only 1 year, not all of them. All right, here we go. So this is how many people won the lottery in 1 year. And right here we have New York, 53 people won. California, 46 people won. Indiana, 41 people won. Right? More people have won the effing lottery than have found the super unique items. And this is part of the reason why I believe that they don't actually have a chance to drop. I think Blizzard is actually controlling the drop rate. Like hitting a little switch somewhere, you know. All right, one's going to drop this month. Just one. But one of the things that I would definitely do is make the super uniques more common. I don't want them to be so common that everyone finds them. That's not what I want. But I personally think that Mang Song's lesson is rare enough. It doesn't need to be rarer than Mang Song's lesson. Mang Song's lesson is already next to impossible to find unless you play like all the time nonstop. And having the super unique items be even more rare than Mang Song's lesson, in my opinion, is just insane. It's mind-bogglingly insane, and that is definitely something that I would fix. Another thing that I would fix is level penalties. So let's go over that real quick. So level penalties in Diablo 4 are just too severe. In Diablo 2, if I wanted to level up with my friends, let's say I had like a level 90, a level 80, a level 70, a level 60, and we all were in the same group. The level 60 could actually do something. The level 70 could actually do something. The level 80 could actually do something. The level 90 could actually get EXP. And all of this is very important because in Diablo 4, it doesn't feel like you can do any of that. For the most part, in the higher level dungeons, like the Nightmare dungeons and things like that, anything greater than about a 15 level difference is enough that the person who's 15 levels lower is pretty much useless. For the majority of the fight. And if you go down to a lower level dungeon so that the lower level character can actually contribute, then the higher level character doesn't really get any EXP because, well, you know, he's now in he's like a level 90 character in like a level 80 dungeon. So, you know, it doesn't really help him out very much. And this is kind of the bad thing about the level penalties, is that they separate out the player base too much so that you can't even play with your friends. If your friend is trying to do a level 60 Nightmare dungeon and you're just not capable of a level 60 Nightmare dungeon, well, you've got one of two choices. Either mooch, basically just mooch with him, you be completely useless and just run behind like a little puppy, or don't play with your friend. Those are really only your two options, and it has to do with the level penalties. It's not necessarily because your character's too weak. It's not because your character can't hang in those dungeons. More often than not, it's just simply because the level penalties are so severe that if you are a level, say, 70 character in a level 90 dungeon, then you are going to have a big issue because the monsters are 20 levels higher than you, and you're dealing with huge penalties to the survivability that you have, and that survivability is just absolutely terrible. I've encountered it myself on both ends of the spectrums. I've both been the high level character who has been pulling behind them the lower level characters like frickin' stones, and I've also been the lower level character who's been pulled behind by the higher level character like a stone, and neither one is very fun. It's not fun being the one that kills everything while your friends are basically just lamenting life, and it's not being the guy who's dying over and over again while everybody else is doing all the work. And for this reason, the level penalties need to be fixed. I think that's pretty much all I'm going to go over today. There is probably some more stuff I could talk about. In fact, you know what? Let me, before I forget, this is one that doesn't even need to be said anymore. I think it's been echoed by the community so many times. But zoom out the damn character, the camera. Zoom out the damn character. I don't know. I don't know why the camera zoomed in so much, but please zoom out the camera. Give me the option to. I just want to be able to zoom out the camera, please. It's too far in. I mean, look at the difference between Diablo 2 and Diablo 4. Look at the zoom level. Look at how much I can see on the map at any given time in Diablo 2. Look at how much I can see on the map in Diablo 4. The difference is astounding. And I can still zoom in on Diablo 2. I can still zoom in and see my character. I can still zoom in. I can zoom in on Diablo 4 and see my character. I can still zoom in on both games and see my character. But in Diablo 2, I can actually zoom out really nice and far, and I can have a really broad view of the playing field. In Diablo 4, the zoom level is pathetic, and it's something that really needs to be addressed. I can't believe I almost forgot that one. I was, yes. As always, I do appreciate you guys and gals watching my videos, even when it's just me talking about how I'd fix Diablo 4. And as always, keep watching.